The stability and developmental trajectory of any complex society, its economy, political institutions, and culture, are predicated upon a core set of accepted anchors. We live our lives assuming these anchors are real, firm, and based on objective reality. We assume the value of a dollar, the security of a bank, or the valuation of a company is determined by demonstrable math, productive output, or guaranteed assets. But history reveals a hidden, dangerous truth. The global financial system has undergone a fundamental transformation. The anchors have shifted from reliance on objective, verifiable data to subjective, collective belief. This is the ultimate evolution of money, the currency of trust. This documentary is a deep forensic analysis of the systemic vulnerabilities inherent in this epistemic transition. We explore what happens when belief becomes the sole mechanism sustaining the valuation of money, and how this fragility guarantees that the most devastating societal shocks are triggered not by war or isolated economic events, but by the sudden rapid unwinding of previously held collective beliefs that were demonstrably erroneous. From the psychological power Augustus built into the Roman denarius to the digital faith driving modern cryptomanias, the pattern is eternal. Money is not a law of nature. It is a human invention, a shared belief system. And once that belief is shattered, the system collapses, crushing everyone who mistook the illusion for safety. For centuries, the concept of money was rooted in something you could touch, weigh, and verify. The modern era is defined by the deliberate structural dismantling of that tangible link, replacing it with pure consensus. For centuries, major global economies were anchored by commodity money, primarily gold, silver, or other metals. Commodity money possesses intrinsic material value. Monetary instruments, in general, ingeniously solve the logistical inefficiency of large-scale barter by assigning value and providing a portable substitute for goods and services. Automatic discipline. The great advantage of the commodity anchor, particularly the gold standard, was automatic discipline. Governments could not print money at will to fund deficits. The supply of money was constrained by the physical supply of the metal. This enforced prudence and kept inflation in check, preventing policymakers from indulging in endless deficit spending. The political cost. However, the limits of commodity money created immense political friction. When a government needed to fund a war or social program, and the gold ran out, the only option was politically painful austerity. This constraint led to the structural tension that eventually destroyed the gold standard. The definitive moment when belief became the essential mechanism sustaining the valuation of money was the global transition to fiat currency. The betrayal of 1971. In 1971, President Richard Nixon unilaterally ended the convertibility of the dollar to gold, terminating the last tether of the dollar to tangible backing. From that moment, the dollar, and every other major global currency, became pure fiat, created out of thin air, backed only by government promise and trust. The illusion of permanence. The lesson of the Nixon shock is clear. Once money stops being real, it becomes a tool of control. The dollar survived, not because it was intrinsically strong, but because the world continued to hold it out of inertia in subsequent geopolitical deals, like the Petrodollar Pact, which forced global demand for USD. This created an illusion of stability, but stability rested on confidence, which is the easiest thing to lose. When systems move from objective anchors, the weight of silver, to subjective anchoring, collective belief, the entire architecture of social and economic exchange becomes fundamentally fragile. The value is no longer inherent in the object, but resides entirely in the minds of the participants. This lack of verifiable intrinsic valuation is the core systemic vulnerability of the modern financial world. The modern system is not just reliant on belief. It is designed to multiply promises far beyond reality, forcing participants to act as both the fuel and the collateral for the entire machine. The foundation of modern banking, fractional reserve banking, is a system of leverage and trust that traces back to medieval goldsmiths. The promise multiplied. Historically, wealthy individuals left gold with goldsmiths for safekeeping, receiving a receipt, a simple note. The goldsmith, realizing not everyone redeemed their gold at once, began issuing loans against gold they didn't actually possess. This practice conjured profits by creating money from nothing. Modern parallel. Today, that same trick has been scaled up to the foundation of modern finance. Banks create money when they issue loans. The digits in your account represent something real only as long as confidence holds. The system is built on promises that can never truly be kept. The numbers on the screen are based not on actual cash in a vault, but on debt, and the belief that the majority of people will not demand their money back simultaneously. Fiat money is inherently tied to debt. Governments issue debt to pay old debt, and banks create money that didn't exist before through lending. This system only survives if more people keep entering and new money dries up, a structure that structurally rhymes with a pyramid scheme. The cost of confidence. This structure means every major financial crisis we have ever lived through, from the bank runs of the Gilded Age to the housing bubble of 2008. is a reminder that the system's stability rests on confidence. When confidence cracks, the house of cards tumbles, and the resulting chaos punishes those who played the game blindly. You are both the fuel and the collateral in a game where the house always wins. The Roman warning on character. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, understood this psychological power. He flooded the empire with silver denarii bearing his face and the word pax, peace, to rebuild trust after civil war. Money, in his view, was not just currency, it was character. Once a society forgets that money represents character and value, collapse stops being a question of if and becomes a matter of when. Later, emperors who debased the coin destroyed not just the economy, but power itself, because bad money destroys not just economies, but the trust in the power that issued it. The history of financial crises demonstrates that the most devastating systemic shocks are triggered by the unwinding of belief. This phenomenon manifests most clearly in speculative bubbles. Economic bubbles occur when current asset prices dramatically exceed their intrinsic valuation, the price justified by underlying long-term fundamentals. These episodes are driven overwhelmingly by psychological factors, overly optimistic projections of growth, or the collective belief that intrinsic valuation metrics are simply no longer relevant to investment decisions. The fatal lie, every bubble, from tulips in 17th century Holland to tech stocks in the 1990s and NFTs in the 21st, starts with the same sentence. This time, it's different. It never is. The real difference is the story people tell themselves before it pops. The 1929 shock. The Great Depression began with the 1929 crash, which was fueled by people borrowing 90% of the cost of shares on margin. Panic selling wiped out billions. The crash didn't just destroy wealth, it shattered trust, plunging the world into depression. The lesson is brutal. Every bubble feels unstoppable until it bursts, and the people who believe it can only happen elsewhere are always the first to be crushed. In 1929, it was stocks. In 2008, it was housing. Today, it's whatever looks too safe to fail. Intelligence is no shield against the madness of men when belief takes hold. The South Sea bubble of 1720, where shares promised unimaginable profits from trade that barely existed, provides the ultimate warning. The genius blinded. Sir Isaac Newton, the greatest scientific mind of his age, famously lost a fortune in the crash. He is said to have remarked, "I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." That single quote captures the essence of every bubble. The most rational mind can be blinded by the glow of easy riches, confusing momentum with intrinsic value. The delusion of effortless wealth. The Ponzi scheme, named after Charles Ponzi, who promised 50% returns in 45 days, survives a century later because hope is stronger than math. His genius was psychology. He knew people wanted to believe in shortcuts and effortless wealth. This eternal scam keeps coming back because people trust the illusion of guaranteed returns, ignoring the obvious truth that real wealth takes time, risk, and effort. Bubbles die not because of math, but when reality runs out of believers. In the age of fiat currency, governments and central banks understand that maintaining belief is synonymous with maintaining power. Therefore, currency credibility becomes a matter of political narrative and control, not just economics. Since the dollar lost its gold tether, central banks have used their authority not just to stabilize prices, but to manage perception. The central banker's coup. Central banks operate under the illusion of neutrality, yet every major intervention, every QE program, every interest rate decision has profound political consequences, deciding who suffers inflation and who receives credit. They are the invisible hand behind every fiscal crisis. They go to great lengths to maintain the illusion of stability, speaking in calm tones, and issuing technical reports, even when the cracks are obvious. The inflation deception. Inflation is often sold as a healthy policy target, but historians recognize it as a policy choice, the most effective tool governments use to pay off debt and externalize costs. By keeping interest rates pinned near zero, a condition known as financial repression, central banks force savers to lose purchasing power, punishing prudence, and pushing citizens to become forced speculators in risky assets, just to try to keep pace with inflation. The foundation of trust in a fiat system is information. When money is backed only by belief, the accuracy and provenance of information become critical resources. The rejection of verification. Today, we face a crisis in epistemic security, the ecosystem of information that allows societies to verify facts. This domain suffers when political discourse rejects verification, and when malicious actors spread fabricated or unsupported information. Deepening distrust in government and information sources is a proven trend. The Roman precedent, Roman emperors, understanding this, used coins not just for trade, but as propaganda. The image and inscription on the coin were the government's message of stability and order. Today, central bank announcements, carefully crafted by technocrats, serve the same purpose. managing the public's epistemic beliefs about financial reality. When belief in the underlying institutions, banks, regulators, media, erodes, the system loses its legitimacy. The history of crises, from the banking panics of the Gilded Age to the IMF's imposition of austerity on debtor nations, shows that systems protect themselves, not the people. Risk socialization. The crisis of belief reveals the ultimate deception. Losses are privatized for profit during the boom, but socialized as public debt during the collapse. The system is designed to protect those who control the levers, ensuring that financial failure is treated as an individual flaw rather than a structural consequence of policy. As the fragility of the fiat system becomes undeniable, the struggle for trust moves into a new digital domain, presenting a choice between two profoundly different systems, one of ultimate centralization and one of ultimate decentralization. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are the proposed future of fiat money. The control mechanism. CBDCs represent the most centralized form of money ever conceived. They promise convenience, but their core functionality is control. As money becomes programmable, every transaction could be tracked, taxed, frozen, or even revoked in real time. This is a system where compliance is built in with code, replacing financial freedom with perfect surveillance. The safety sold to the public is, in fact, the cage. Precedents for seizure. The fear is rooted in history. The 1933 gold confiscation by the U.S. government, where private gold ownership was made illegal, demonstrated that when systems strain, rights shrink. CBDCs are viewed by skeptics as the digital echo of 1933 control without the messy, physical act of confiscation. In response to the centralized failures of fiat, decentralized finance, DeFi, and cryptocurrencies emerged, built on the promise of trustless money anchored by mathematical scarcity. The quest for autonomy. Assets like Bitcoin represent a profound yearning for money that cannot be printed, censored, or inflated away. They return to the law of scarcity. Gold, too, is making a comeback as central banks hedge against their own currency's fragility, recognizing that it is the only money that doesn't require belief or permission. The decentralization illusion. However, even decentralized systems struggle with the limits of trust. Many crypto projects and exchanges suffer from opacity, network effects, and concentration of wealth, leading to collapses and fraud that fundamentally resemble the South Sea bubble or Ponzi schemes written in code. The illusion of decentralization often masks old forms of risk and power. The battle is clear. The future monetary system will either be defined by code-enforced centralized trust, CBDCs, or mathematically verifiable, decentralized scarcity, hard assets. Mitigating the systemic risks associated with the reliance on subjective belief requires a coordinated strategy focused on securing information, strengthening accountability, and re-anchoring financial systems to verifiable metrics. The focus must shift from chasing nominal gains based on market momentum to securing value based on verifiable fundamentals. Objective oversight. Financial models must be re-anchored to reality. This requires strengthening accountability through independent regulatory watchdogs and mandatory transparency of collateral. Stress testing must include belief-driven variables, acknowledging that panic is a nonlinear variable that must be modeled. Disciplined investment. Investors must move away from the anchoring bias, which causes decision makers to overweight the first piece of information received, e.g., initial price or hype, leading to fatal investment decisions. Real financial education means understanding that the system works on information asymmetry. Just as generals secure their supply lines, societies must secure their information ecosystems. Securing the narrative. The spread of fabricated or unsupported information must be countered. This requires developing digital provenance standards and actively supporting reliable, verifiable sources to increase the cost for malicious actors, adversaries, and blunderers who seek to destabilize the market narrative. Restoring trust. Institutional trust, which is measured by perceived legitimacy, must be restored through mandatory transparency and addressing the accountability of non-elected guardians, such as central bank technocrats. The ultimate defense against the currency of trust breaking is preparing for a world where belief is irrelevant. Real wealth. Real wealth is what survives when money fails. It is purchasing power. The families who survived hyperinflation in Weimar and Zimbabwe relied on real assets, useful skills, and networks of trust. Land that grows food, productive tools, gold, and tangible commodities hold value because they do not depend on the government's promise. The Stoic mindset. Financial freedom isn't about having more. It's about needing less and staying in control when fortune turns. The Stoic philosophy teaches that dependence on wealth is just another form of bondage. By mastering your desires and focusing on what you can control, your mind, habits, and expectations, you build the only financial armor that never fails in a crisis. The law of proximity. Since the Cantillon effect dictates that wealth flows to those closest to the creation of new money, awareness allows you to position yourself outside the trap. Own assets that benefit from early liquidity, hold scarce resources, and build value in the real world that no policy can inflate away. The currency of trust is the most powerful, yet most fragile, financial structure ever conceived. It granted an exorbitant privilege to the United States, but it simultaneously exposed the entire global economy to the dangers of subjective anchoring. When the stability of the system relies solely on the illusion of stability, its vulnerability is terminal. The greatest lesson financial history teaches us is that the collapse of belief is the terminal failure mode for any fiat system. The historical cycle of debt, monetization, inflation, and collapse proves that the system will repeat its mistakes. The question for every individual today is not whether the system will fall apart. It always does. The question is whether you will be one of the many left holding promises or one of the few holding something real. The biggest bubble isn't Bitcoin or tech stocks or real estate. It's the illusion that someone else will warn you before it bursts. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand the blueprint of collapse, it will crush you all the same.